and welcome back to Ghouls Night In, the spooky chat show with your best ghoul friends. I'm Penny Snark.
And I'm Midge Monster. And Penny, you know what I was thinking today? I was thinking it has been a while since I have talked about monsters.
Oh.
Y'all know I am a big old monster nerd, and I know we've chatted about a lot of things within the kind of umbrella of my special interest of the '60s monster craze. We've talked about the Addams Family and the Munsters and horror hosts, and the one little kind of element within this that I feel like we haven't really discussed yet is monster magazines. And
Ooh.
so I wanted to delve into the history of these a little bit and why they happened, where they came from, what their prevalence is today.
Oh, I'm very intrigued. I don't think I know anything about monster magazines.
Oh, yay. I get to bring the weird stuff this
Yeah.
time. So we'll kind of start with where these began. Even though the monster craze was pretty American, the first horror film magazine was actually a British publication, which not completely surprising because Hammer Horror was a British film house. But Screen Chills appeared in 1957, but it only had one issue. And it's pretty widely forgotten, unfortunately, in the history of monster mags. And I even tried to find more information about what the setup of the magazine was and what was in it, and there's really no information about it
Hmm.
except like old copies for sale and a couple pictures of the cover. And likely the reason that it was kind of forgotten so quickly is because it was eclipsed by the hugely successful magazine that came out the next year. So if you are familiar with monster magazines, you probably know the Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine. This launched in February of 1958 from publisher James Warren and editor Forrest J. Ackerman. This was initially supposed to be a like one-shot publication, and this was a quote that I found to be funny for some reason, aimed at being the monster movie version of Playboy.
I'm into that.
Right. But of course, as we've talked about in previous episodes, this 1958 slot is like right when the shock theater surge was happening and everybody's into monsters. So sales were very high, and it was very quickly decided that the magazine was going to become a regular publication. So it ends up being published from 1958 until 1983,
Oh, wow.
with 191 issues, sort of. Well, more on that later, but we'll call it 191 for the time. So a little bit of background information about Forrest J. Ackerman, the editor of Famous Monsters that I mentioned. So this man is extremely fascinating to me. He was a writer, and he had like a lot of things going for him, but he was also just kind of an independently wealthy collector.
Nice. The dream.
And
The dream.
right. And he had an 18-room home called the Acker Mansion that contained over 300,000 books and pieces of horror and science fiction memorabilia.
Dang.
So he had this like huge private home collection. There are tours of it on YouTube that you can find. I would highly recommend checking these out. It's fascinating. Uh, it's also bizarre because like these are really big pieces of film history, and a lot of them are just like sitting like they're on shelves. They're not like haphazardly displayed, but they're just kind of all like stuck
Yeah.
around.
Just
Like
around.
it's bizarre. It's so crazy cool though. And from 1951 up to 2002, Ackerman was open open housing his home to fans. Like if people would come through, he would show it like a museum, which is wild. I mean, I guess if you're gonna do that, like if you're gonna
Yeah.
go to the trouble of collecting everything. Um, But he also is supposedly kind of credited with inventing the idea of cosplay at the first World Science Fiction Convention in 1939.
Mm.
And then he's also credited as coining the term sci-fi.
Man, this guy was all over it.
Really like interesting person. He has a lot going on. And so they did something really smart with this magazine where because he had this like huge private collection, they had access to stills and things that were not readily available to the public. And so they began publishing Famous Monsters. They also did something really smart where they, rather than making this like a hard hitting, deep film analysis, like
Hmm.
journalistic piece, they aimed the writing at adolescents and preteens. So it was really like fun and campy and just full of like atrocious puns.
Excellent.
Yeah, right up our alley. And that kind of set the tone for all future of monster magazines. For a lot of people, this was their first look into filmmaking and horror in general, and it was massively influential to a lot of future directors and writers. I know Steven Spielberg has talked about this as like kind of a gateway drug for him. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe when we were at Midsummer Scream, Kevin Williamson from Scream actually talked about this being kind of a starting
Yeah,
point for him as
I
well. I
think
know
so.
one of the three of them brought up Famous Monsters, and I'm
Hmm.
pretty sure it was Kevin. Um, I know it wasn't Brian because that's when he talked about monster cereal.
Yes.
So it was either him or Michael. But yeah, so it also just has a huge. This magazine has a huge place in horror history in the sense that it gets a lot of people interested in what is behind making the movies. Uh, it is interesting though. I found a lot when reading about this that there was also a lot of criticism about not just the magazines, but just kind of this media type in
Hmm.
general, including like the horror hosts as well, that people saw this as like infantilizing the genre and
Hmm.
making it something for kids, and not because like how modern people are like it's corrupting the youth,
Yeah.
not even for that reason. Like people were upset that the genre was being like minimized to
Yeah.
something
Like,
for
these are my
children.
big boy monster movies.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm a big boy and I love the monsters. um but I find that interesting that we kind of even here in the early 60s start to see the roots of where I feel like the genre is kind of at right now, with a lot of folks striving for this like elevated highbrow
Hmm.
horror and
Yeah.
trying to make it uh something that I think it can be that, but I think like there's a really fine line between like infantile and camp, and I think a lot of people don't know what camp is.
Yeah. For sure.
But horror still, I mean, is something very linked to like the adolescent experience, I think, and so that's very interesting that this is kind of where this begins. So there's another figure I want to talk about as well, another person involved in the making of these magazines, and one of my favorite things about them is the like stunning cover art. And Famous Monsters covers were almost entirely done by an artist named Basil Gogos, and he was an American illustrator. And he did all the monster portraits on the covers of the 60s and 70s issues. And to me, he is like what Tim Jacobus was for Goosebumps.
Yeah.
The art is like so bright, so arresting, so specific. Like it just really sucks you in. And I I would collect these magazines. I would love to actually. I would love to be a collector of these magazines, and just frame them for the covers. Honestly, even without any of the inside goodness, they're so pretty.
Yeah.
So
I'm looking at pictures now, and they are very cool.
yeah, aren't they neat? So shout out to Basil. You did a great job, bud. But speaking of the inside, what was on the inside?
What's in there?
What's in there? I found a clip from an original, one of the first couple of the publications that came out, and I would just like to read this if that's if everyone would like to go on this ride with me, because it really sets the tone for these magazines. Welcome, monster lovers. You're stuck. The stuff this magazine is printed on, which looks so much like ordinary black printer's ink, is actually glue.
Whoa.
All caps. You cannot put this magazine down. Hard as you may struggle, it is impossible. Like a zombie, you have no will of your own. For this unique magazine bears the fatal fascination of beauty for the beast, of monsters for the maiden's fair, and monster makers unfair. Did your last date call you a monster?
Mm.
Do your friends think you're horrible? On Halloween, do they say, "Take off that mask, Frankenstein," and you're not even wearing a mask? Wives, do you consider your husband to be a Jekyll and Hyde? Husbands, do you sometimes wish you were the Invisible Man? Everybody, all caps again. Do you know all the faces of Frankenstein? About Lon Chaney's 180 pictures? How many quarts of blood did Bela Lugosi drink in Dracula? And 10,000 other amazing facts about fantastic monsters? So this is the vibe.
I love it. We're
Um,
going all in. We need to start advertising the podcast like that, Midge.
yeah, and it's like it's too much, and I love that. Like
Yes.
it walked up to the line, it perceived the line, and then it like jumped over it.
Yes.
It's so stupid and campy, and I adore it. So, uh, but that's what's inside. It's this kind of campy, goofy, but also very factual. Like that last sentence, they are talking about the fun facts behind the films,
Yeah,
and
10,000 facts.
10,000 amazing facts. Um, but they are showing, like I said, these not screenshots, that doesn't exist yet, but stills from behind the scenes of artists putting makeup on the monsters, how they do the prosthetics, how they're doing different effects, and it's honestly very, very cool. And I'm still to this day an absolute slut for a practical effect. So seeing
Yes.
the behind the scenes on this is really something very cool.
Yeah, I mean, we get to see so much behind the scenes these days,
Right.
with being able to have like social media or even like, a DVD featurette back in the day.
Oh, I loved.
So
I
definite.
was such a like nerd for
Oh yeah.
the bonus features on a DVD set. And that's exactly what this is pre that. It's
Yes.
Google before Google. You couldn't just like search, creature from the Black Lagoon makeup question mark, like
Pictures of Lon Chaney as Frankenstein.
right. So it was a big deal. It was giving people that look behind the curtain. So Warren Publications also released several other things under the same umbrella. They did a yearbook, or a fear book, as it was called occasionally, for Famous Monsters each year, recapping the best of the year's issues. They also had a couple other several other magazines, but a couple that were more popular than others. The one in particular, the Dick Smith Do It Yourself Monster Makeup Handbook. And this one had like step by step photo guides showing you how to create monsters on your face.
Makeup tutorial.
Exactly. The OG YouTube beauty influencer. I have to out myself a little bit here. Something I did a lot as a child. We used to go to the public library, and we would rent this VHS called Party Makeup. And I watched it no less than 7,000 times. Like, I was constantly like making my parents recheck out this video for me.
Was this like costume party makeup, or like just like looking beautiful makeup?
Oh no, costume.
Okay,
Yeah,
just
it was
checking.
like like showing you how to turn yourself into a witch, a vampire.
Oh man.
But it was like made in the late 70s or early 80s. It was like an infomercial bad, like just terrible, quality. But that was my version of Dick Smith's Do It Yourself. Because I would have loved this as a kid. I was constantly trying to figure out how to like turn myself into weird and wonderful Fantastic Monsters.
And look at you now.
And look at me now. I am a monster permanently.
A weird and fantastic monster.
They also released these kind of like one-off picture story magazines, and there was one that I found researching that I was very drawn to that was called like Horror Beach Party Madness, and it was like these were kind of mixing the like monster smut a little bit with the horror, so it's like a lot of bikini babes like, oh no, Mr. Monster Man.
Oh no.
Really, really fun illustrations, and just like they were one-off stories of horror about a monster taking over different, locales. Lot of fun. This I'm excited to share. So in 1963, the magazine loaned its name to an album called Famous Monsters Speak.
Ooh.
And it was like a little LP featuring horror stories written by Cherney Berg. That's someone's name, Cherney Berg. And the stories were told by the voices of the monsters, done by a voice actor. So, fun fact about this, when Miranda was visiting me in Kansas City a few weeks ago, we went to a record store here and we found this vinyl and I bought it.
Hey!
And I just, at the time, I thought it was like bizarre. I saw it and I was like, I have no clue. I have no concept for what it was. And I just saw monsters and I was like, yeah, check. But then when I was researching, I saw the cover and I was like, oh my god, I have that. I have not listened to it yet because I just got it a couple weeks ago, but now I will definitely be listening to it. I'm so excited that I have a piece of Famous Monsters of Filmland history.
It was meant to be.
It was meant to be. So shout out to Miranda also, because she definitely found it first and then like showed it to me and I was like, oh, I want to buy that. And she was like, here you go. I was like, oh wait, did you want it? She's like, it's fine.
Oh. A real trooper.
A real pal. So that was 1963. In 1964, Warren and Ackerman tried to publish a spin-off magazine called Monster World. It was literally the exact same magazine, basically, but under another title, so it pretty much flopped.
Yeah.
So they axed it after only 10 issues, and then, this was funny, they do this, like, sneaky little thing. So remember at the beginning when I said that Famous Monsters had 191 issues, sort of?
Yes.
Well, they decided to just go ahead and skip 10 issue numbers of Famous Monsters of Filmland to get closer to their 100th like issue, and they were basically like, well, Monster World counted as those 10 issues. Sorry, guys.
All right.
Just what?
Sure.
Yeah. I'm sure everybody was like, okay.
Maybe we should do our 100th episode next week, Midge.
Yeah.
It's here.
Yeah, well, I think that's perfect. We'll say that Snarkcast was counted as the other like 30 episodes.
And we'll throw in a couple of your videos. Those are close enough.
Yeah, perfect. We're there. We're present. I will say Monster World has a really cool holiday issue of it. Like I said, there were only 10, but one of them happened to be published around the holidays. And it's this really cool, like, peacocky green cover with Frankenstein in a Santa suit.
Ooh.
And then it has, like, pink font and says something about, like, have a cool Yule with a ghoul.
Hell yeah.
And I would like to find that issue and just frame it. I think it's really, really cute.
That's pretty great.
So there were a lot of, much like anything that is good, there were a lot of publications that tried to rip the Famous Monsters of Filmland idea, and
including themselves.
Yeah, including Monster World. Yeah, don't rip off your own product. Or do. Maybe that's smart business. I don't know. Apparently not.
Apparently not.
But pretty like immediately after they started seeing success, there were a lot of copycats. There was Monster Parade. This one included comic strips and fiction stories alongside the movie coverage, but it only lasted for 4 issues, and then had 2 follow-up issues of the same magazine but called Monsters and Things. There was also 1962's Fantastic Monsters of Films.
Okay.
Totally not a rip
No.
at all. Um, but they did aim their writing at a more mature audience, and they actually, this was the one that kind of had a lot, like had a pretty good success rate. Unfortunately, while they were printing their 8th issue, they had a huge fire, which there was a part of me reading this, I was like, that's suspicious. That's
Mm-hmm.
weird.
That's weird.
But they unfortunately, like, not only did they lose the issue they were working on, but they were in like the publishing warehouse that had all these like irreplaceable film stills and things, because this magazine also had a collector behind it, and I totally forgot to write down what his name, but he was like a semi-famous rock star from that era, so he had money and he had like, much like Ackerman had precious, film memorabilia, that was destroyed in that fire, and then the publication pretty much fell to complete non-existence
Wah,
after
wah,
that.
wah. That's a
Um,
bummer.
yeah, sorry, Fantastic Monsters of Films. Maybe you shouldn't steal people's names, and that wouldn't happen. Uh, but there were, yeah, tons. There's like Castle of Frankenstein. There was one that was it's like Monsters to Make You Laugh, and it was done by Stan Lee. And the covers were monsters with like funny, quote, funny captions, like speech bubbles. Um, but a lot of these magazines, what they did not do that Filmland was doing so well is that a lot of these magazines ended up focusing a lot more on sci-fi.
Mm-hmm.
Like of Frankenstein ended up basically becoming a Star Trek fan mag later in its publication years, and so none of them were truly like dedicating to horror the way Famous Monsters was. So they were the ones that really withstood the test of time until, unfortunately, um, Warren, the publisher, got ill in the 80s, and after that, Ackerman kind of stepped away because the organization, like the put togetherness, not the
Yeah.
organization, the thing, but the put togetherness of it, just kind of fell to crap, and so they stopped publishing it. Um, but these magazines, like I said, really paved the way for current horror publication news and end up kind of being the precursor to publications like Fangoria
Mm-hmm.
now, which is the big one I think most of us think of when we think horror news. But I also, while we're here, I wanted to mention a few indie publications,
Ooh, yes.
community publications of the now. We're going to talk about some current horror stuff going on. So, specifically, one I think is very cool. Friend of the show, Ashlita,
Hey.
started publishing a really cool magazine last year through her Halloween coalition group called Peekaboo for the Sophisticated Ghoul, and it's like a mashup of, which I thought this was cool, and I'm sure she knew this because she's smart. But it is like a mashup of a 60s Playboy and a Famous Monsters of Filmland
Yeah.
magazine, which now I understand that was kind of what they were going for, even though it wasn't. They weren't,
Sexy.
yeah,
Yeah.
they weren't doing sexy. They were doing bikini girls being chased by monsters, but um, so in Ashley's magazine, all the pinups in the magazine are like doing some kind of take on a monster, and it's really, really beautiful photography, super cool makeup, styling is gorgeous. And then there's a ton of great articles in it as well. And if you have interest, I do know that at this time she is currently taking submissions for the next publication of this magazine. So
Ooh.
follow Ashlita and Halloween Coalition on Instagram for more information about this publication. And if you want to submit articles or what have you, you can submit those proposals right now. It's really cool. I don't think anybody, I mean, like I said, obviously Fangoria, but like I don't think anybody's doing something like this that's so niche and really based in the kind of OG flavor of it.
Yeah, for sure.
It's really, really cool. And then, of course, not really horror or monsters, but I do have to shout out our friend Miranda. Spooky Little Halloween also produces an awesome Halloween magazine and quarterly zine that you can check out.
So fun.
So fun. And I'm going to derail because of who I am as a person, but I honestly just love print media. And I think that we need more of it.
Yeah,
Like,
it's nice.
having something that you can like hold is it's that shared experience of like, like when Stranger Things happened and they only released the first half, and so we had, for the first time in a very long time, because TV isn't like episodic anymore, like we all had that communal experience of talking about the thing we all watched and like waiting for the next part and being
Yeah.
left on a cliffhanger together. Like those kind of communal experiences are dwindling so much in the age of technology, and having like a print thing that we all get this shared moment of like, ooh, we all got the publication when it came out this week and now we all get to read it and talk about it together is just so fun and cool. So support indie publications, please.
Yes.
And speaking of bringing it back, interestingly, the Famous Monsters of Filmland brand has been purchased by the frontman of Slipknot,
All
Corey
right.
Taylor. So that was I wasn't ready for that. But it's exciting. He actually plans to relaunch the magazine as
Oh,
a
cool.
biannual or annual, they haven't decided yet, publication. So it won't be as frequent as the original, but still very cool. And he also plans to put the Famous Monsters brand on toys, films, and cons and festivals. So I read an interview with him where he was talking about doing like a Famous Monsters con that would more or less celebrate kind of the legacy of Forrest Ackerman, and
Mm-hmm.
that they would have kind of a traveling museum that would pay homage to the Acker Mansion.
No, cool.
And but he was also talking about kind of doing a generational like transfer of both honoring the original monsters but then the monsters that he grew up with, like Freddy and Michael and Jason,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of connecting the generational monster gap there. So I don't know, I think this could be really cool. He just broke this news at Son of Monster Palooza this past October, so this is pretty fresh out the gate. But I really hope that they do it justice and that they kind of keep the original feel of the magazine. He also mentioned that they are going to release every back issue of Famous
Ooh.
Monsters of Filmland. They're going to digitize it and make them available to read online for free. So if you're not previously familiar with these magazines, and obviously, print things fall apart and are hard to
Yes.
preserve if you don't do it on purpose. So I'm sure that there aren't a ton of copies of these out there anymore. So this is going to be a great opportunity to familiarize yourself with this little niche area of monster history if you are interested.
I
So I'm
look
excited.
forward to learning thousands and thousands of more facts.
Tens of thousands
Tens
of
of
facts
thousands of
about.
facts.
Thanks, Corey Taylor. Thanks, Slipknot. But yeah, that is a very I would say a very Reader's Digest
Yes.
history of monster magazines. We could do, and if this is something that interests any of y'all listening, let me know, because we could do a deep dive too into the magazines that flopped and the weird ones that came out, and there's a whole another 30-minute session of things we could talk about to this. So
Mm.
but yeah, thanks for letting me talk more to you about monsters, because anytime I get the chance, I'm excited.
It's always a good time. Yeah, I like when I looked at the covers, I was like, okay, like I recognize some of these images, but
Mm-hmm.
was not really familiar with with the publication. So I'm glad to learn a new monster. I learned new monster facts today from you, Midge.
I
Maybe
am
not 10,000, but like probably at least like 10.
I am the mini zine of Famous Monsters of Filmland. Well, thank you all so much for listening today. If you are enjoying listening to this podcast, we would so appreciate it if you would consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or a rating wherever you listen. That really helps us reach new audiences and let us know that we're doing a good job. We don't have any fresh reviews to read for you today, so if you have been thinking about it and you haven't gotten around to it, be sure to drop that review right now.
Right now.
Right now.
Right now. And if you have or haven't left a review, you can still check out Ghouls Night In merch at our merch store, midgemonster.com/shop, and get all sorts of cool and comfy stuff to show how much you love the Spooky Pod. We appreciate it, and definitely tag us when you receive your stuff. We love to see it.
Yeah. And give us a follow over on Instagram at Ghouls Night In Pod for more information and to see fun pictures from things we talk about on the episodes. We have some very exciting stuff on the threshold for Ghouls Night In, and you are not gonna want to miss it. So be sure to
Yes.
follow us over there and subscribe to the pod so that you are keeping up with all the hot goss as it comes. And if you are looking for me, you can find me across all platforms at Midge Munster.
And you can find me at Penny Snark.
And until next time,
Goodbye.
bye.